If you want to ensure your belief is protected, how do you do that? Well, you make sure that it is stupid but sincere. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about protected beliefs, because somebody asked me in the comments on the back of a previous video. So I'll explain what a protected belief is, the test for what amounts to a protected belief, and why, generally speaking, it's regarded as one of the daftest and most pointless and, hardest to follow tests that we have in law. So what's a protected belief? It's one where you cannot be discriminated against for holding. You cannot be treated less favourably. Usually crops up in employment contexts, and that's where most of the case law comes from. But it could be sort of being refused service, things like that. So what's the history of this? Well, it used to be that you couldn't be discriminated against. It started off with just for race or sex. And then that went to religion. You couldn't be discriminated against because of your religion. And then people said, well, that's not fair, because, what if I'm not religious? What if my belief is I don't believe any of this? If somebody can't sack me for holding a particular religion, then surely they can't sack me for not holding a particular religion. And now the test has expanded. There's a test in Granger, which I'm going to read out because it's a bit complicated, but it's got 5 limbs. The first thing is, the belief must be genuinely held. The second limb, you've got to get all of these, it must be a belief and not an opinion or viewpoint based on the present state of the information available. 3, it must be a belief as to a weighty and substantial aspect of human life and behaviour. 4, it must attain a certain level of cogency, seriousness, cohesion and importance. 5, it must be worthy of respect in a democratic society, not be incompatible with human dignity, and not conflict with the fundamental rights of others. Sorry, I'm filming behind the hotel in an alleyway because I thought if it's good enough for Bob Dylan for Subterranean Homesick Views, it's good enough for me. So what's the first one? The belief must be genuinely held. That seems simple enough, doesn't it? And actually, that's one limb where they don't really look into that. They just take your word for it, with a caveat that I will come on to. But it's not right, it's just wrong. Say, for instance, somebody says, I'm not going to give you a job because I don't like anybody who holds your particular religion. Well, that's direct discrimination. It's automatically unlawful. But what if you actually don't hold that belief? You go, well, actually, mate, I'm an atheist. I don't hold any of those beliefs. Doesn't matter. Basically, you've been discriminated against instantly, and they don't even look at the other bits. So, that's just irrelevant, isn't it? What about the second thing? It must be a belief and not an opinion or viewpoint based on the present state of information available. Now, I read a really good article on this that went on about Sir Fred Hoyle, my favourite astronomer, because he's a belligerent Yorkshireman. He's the guy who said, outer space isn't that far away. It's only an hour's drive if your car could go straight up. But he was a proponent of what we call the steady state theory, as opposed to the Big Bang. In other words, the universe has always been here, and it didn't just pop out, and it's been expanding ever since. Now, at the time he said that, the idea of the Big Bang and the expanding universe, he actually came up with the term Big Bang, but he meant it as an insult. He went, you people just believe it all started with some Big Bang, typical Yorkshireman, and then they adopted that. Now, at the time he said that, the evidence was basically either way. They hadn't really researched this. So that wouldn't have been a protected belief because it was based on his assessment of the evidence. But he held on to that belief even after every other cosmologist said it's definitely been proven that there was a Big Bang. So the irony is then, because he was going against sort of prevalent scientific opinion, it was, like I say, it was I don't want to say stupid belief, but it was a wrong belief, but he sincerely held it. So that would actually pass the test, rather strangely. Now, to give you a more practical example, there was a magistrate who said, look, I cannot sit on same-sex adoption cases because I think the research shows that this is harmful to children. And he was removed from the bench, and he basically challenged that. But the tribunal came back and said, well, no, because you've based this on the evidence and you've said you're willing to change your mind if the evidence changes, that's not a protected belief because it's based on opinion. And as people point out, if he'd have just said, I don't like gay people, he'd have been better off being a bigot rather than somebody rational. He would have been protected. Yeah, also it's next to the car park. But what about the third limb? It must be a belief. It must be a belief as to a weighty and substantial aspect of human life and behaviour. To give one example, so things like I believe, animal rights is a protected belief, even though it's not human behaviour. But it's how you live your life, and religion, because lots of people are religious and they live their lives accordingly. But there was one guy who basically brought a claim on the basis he was discriminated against because he was a Celtic fan. And they said, well, okay, we believe that, and certainly up there, Celtic versus Rangers, it practically is a religious belief. But it didn't sort of tick the, substantial and weighty matter. They said it's a bit trivial, so it's not protected. Now, here's the one. It must attain a certain level of cogency, seriousness, cohesion, and importance. Well, that's really helpful, isn't it? What does certain level mean? I mean, that's a really good test. They've actually said it's a very, very low threshold. Cogency, you must be able to explain what your belief is. If it's just some vague, nebulous, I sort of think this, it doesn't count. But also the cohesion, you must, adhere to it. Now, there's an interesting one where, how far does that have to go? There was a guy, he worked in a business that was run by hunt supporters, but he himself was a hunt sap, and they sacked him. They said, look, our customers can't stand you. And he brought a claim on the basis that the sanctity of animal life was his belief. And they said, okay, because, the mere fact that your customers don't, it might annoy your customers, you can't discriminate for people like that, because otherwise it'd be like, well, I'm a bigot and I won't shop in this place if you've got people of a particular ethnicity. But they challenged that and said, well, okay, you're claiming to be, like a vegan. But you wear clothes with animal dyes, things like that. The court said, look, it doesn't have to be perfect. And the fact is, we all live in the real world. Actually, the test for veganism actually includes so far as is practicable and possible. So technically, that still ticks the vegan box. But here's the thing. It only applies to ethical veganism. It's like, I am a vegan because I believe in the sanctity of animal life. I'm a vegan because I think that's the healthiest way to live. Well, that's a scientific opinion. You've come to that conclusion logically. So veganism for health reasons or fitness reasons or whatever, that's not protected. Only ethical veganism is. And I can come back to this. If you can explain it scientifically or logically as to why you came to that conclusion, you fail the test. But if you say, I just innately believe it, you don't. And the final one, which catches some people out, it must be worthy of respect in a democratic society, be not incompatible with human dignity, could have just said compatible with human dignity, I think there, and not conflict with the fundamental rights of others. Again, they've said that's a very low bar. They've said pretty much, unless you're sort of, out and out, wanting to sort of be a totalitarian or saying, we should wipe out everybody on Earth, it is protected. I mean, there's an interesting case where it was a Holocaust denier. And his argument was, I have looked at the evidence and I think it never happened. But they said, well, because you've arrived at that through evidence, even if it's against all the evidence, it's not protected. If you just said, I don't care what anybody says, I don't believe it happened, I mean, arguably it would have passed the first 4 limbs. It might fall at this limb. So that's a test. But what about political beliefs? Well, they have less protection, but they do have some protection if they're based on a fundamental sort of, aspect of your life. And it's rather strange, this, because you could sack somebody for being a member of a political party. I mean, to give the example, communism may well be a protected belief. Being a member of the Communist Party and being discriminated against that might not be protected. And you get all sorts of interesting ones. There was an interesting one where, remember when the Scottish nationalists broke up and set up ALBA, the Alternative Party? And then somebody was sacked for being a member of that party. They said, it's incompatible with being a member of the SNP supporting ALBA. And he said, well, I am being discriminated against because of a protected belief. I believe Scotland should be independent. And they said, well, no, there, because you both hold the same belief. You're just expressing it differently. So, it's an interesting one. There was also a case where somebody was a Trotskyist. And he came along and said, I'm being discriminated for being a Trotskyist. And they said, and I am a revolutionary. I think, we should have, a revolution and we should live to Marxist ideals. I won't get into all the Marxism stuff. As Karl Marx himself said, I'm not sure what Marxism is, but I'm definitely not a Marxist. But they said there, well, no, you fail at that hurdle because How can revolutionary politics be compatible with a democratic society? I mean, people have said the judgment there is more or less, it just doesn't seem to tick the box. I mean, you probably could have done an argument sort of based on that. But like I say, it is this rather bewildering thing. So you see how complicated the test is and how irrelevant some limbs are and how it all seems a bit arbitrary. The thing to remember is these decisions, they all come from the Employment Tribunal and the Employment Appeal Tribunal. None of them have actually gone to the Court of Appeal. And people have said, well, if they go to the Court of Appeal, maybe we'll get something, you know, a little bit more coherent. We might get a better, clearer test. And also, like, you know, in terms of what the discrimination is, a protected belief allows you to hold that belief, express that belief, and to a certain extent manifest that belief. So protected beliefs, you can basically hold them in your head. Nobody can legislate against what you're thinking. It hasn't quite got to the sort of thought crime element. You can express that belief. I believe this. Although sometimes it's how you do it. You know, you might say, I hold this belief that a lot of people would find discriminatory. But you can say, you know, I believe this. But if you were to getting into a row with a particular individual about it, you know, we're getting to all the sort of, you know, I don't think I should have to use people's preferred pronouns. You can say that, but if you were to refuse to use somebody's, you know, that's expressing your belief, or is it manifesting your belief? And also, you know, you come back on the other side, because sometimes you will get beliefs that are diametrically opposed, but they're both protected. But yeah, the manifesting the belief is where it comes in. You know, I sincerely hold my vegan beliefs, so I'm not going to serve any carnists who walk into my shop, you know, people who eat meat. You know, well, you can't manifest it. There are limitations on the manifesting element. So there you go. I mean, I think like this is a topic that we could talk about for hours, just because it is so chaotic, confusing. The decisions all seem a bit arbitrary because, you know, they're all Employment Tribunal decisions at first instance, or they've gone to the Employment Appeal Tribunal, which, you know, don't get me wrong, you know, some very clever, smart people sit on that. But it's evolved over time, and it's one of these areas where, you know, viewpoints shift a lot. So if people do want, you know, more detail on this, let me know in the comments. But I'm not sure I can do any better than the Employment Appeal Tribunal has done, or all the very clever people who've written articles about this. But there you go. As always, hope you found that vaguely useful, vaguely informative, vaguely interesting. Where am I today? Like I said, I'm actually in Bristol. I was up doing some advocacy training for the wonderful Western Circuit, and all our, so what we call a new practitioners course. It's all barristers who've been on their feet for a few years now, but they have to do this course, so they get the dubious benefits of my wisdom. The trouble is they're all too good and too smart these days. I mean, the last exercise we did was all based on medical negligence, and one of the lasses, she'd been practicing medical negligence for 3 years. She sat there all really politely while we went through the exercise and critiqued her performance. And then as we were all leaving and saying goodbye, she just came up and said, oh, by the way, it's pronounced troker, which I thought was quite nice. But yeah, I did actually go location shooting, because Bristol's a really pretty city, just don't ask how it's paid for. And there were loads of great places I wanted to film. I was going to film round at the Landogger Trow, which is a great pub, but I couldn't get an angle where the pub looked great, but I wasn't shooting up my nose. And also, I did loads of location shooting yesterday, and then today it was all siling it down. So I didn't want to venture too far from where it's dry, and they have a source of coffee. But there you go, like I say, see you next time. And if there is anything more that you want me to follow up on this, let me know in the comments. And I'd be really interested to actually hear your comments on this one, because, you know, it is a nightmare area.